The law hasn't always been the same, and I think the opinions have shifted a little bit. We're the Armed Attorneys. Today we're answering the question of, should I get an NFA trust? We're going to be talking about what the NFA is, what NFA items are, whether you should own them as an individual or in a trust, what the law was, what the law is now, and we're going to give you our ultimate opinion on whether we think it's a good idea. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button and consider becoming a channel member, linked in the description below. But to start off the conversation, Emily, let's start with, what is the NFA?
Essentially our first major piece of firearms legislation in this country. Weapons that were considered especially scary and dangerous in the 1920s still haunt us today as things that we need to jump through a bunch of hoops, register, pay a tax for, basically get the federal government's permission to own and possess. And that's things like fully automatic weapons, short barrel shotguns, short barrel rifles, suppressors, AOWs, like your mafia weapons, basically, is what we're
That's
still...
what they were worried about.
Exactly right.
And what we see on a state level is most states will say, if you possess or own these items in compliance with federal law, they're going to be A-OK under state law. There are a handful of states that say, we are not going to allow NFA items for any reason. You guys know who you are. But this conversation came up because, trust law and NFA Trust, there's two real ways to own these items, and that's as an individual, or that's when the items are owned by a trust and you're a designated person who can possess the item. And the law hasn't always been the same, and I think the opinions have shifted a little bit. But to figure out why we got here, what was the law prior to 2016?
Sure. And, we'll throw in, although no one does this, you can also own these items by corporation, but it's a huge pain in the butt. Don't do it. It's just not, it's a miserable option. So before 2016, we lived in a very different world in which it was really, really preferable to own these items by trust, not as an individual. Why? Because individuals prior to 2016 were the only ones who had to send in photographs, fingerprints, and not only notify the chief law enforcement officer in their county or municipality or what have you that they were going to apply for these items, they actually had to get the sign off of that chief law enforcement officer, basically saying, yeah, I think this person is, cool to possess this item, which for a lot of people was impossible to get. I mean, can you imagine like the Harris County District Attorney or the Harris County Sheriff giving us the sign off to own it? Absolutely not. It would never happen. And so trusts were great. You would have a lawyer create a trust. You didn't have to have any filings with the federal government other than, of course, your Form 1 or your Form 4, get your tax stamp. But there was no other government intervention, basically. You just had an attorney create a trust. After 2016, and this rule was published in, I want to say early 2016, and then went into effect probably around July of 2016, we really changed the world of NFA items, right?
Yes. And that brings us to today and raises the question of why somebody would get a trust now if all things have kind of been made equal, because that's essentially what has happened. They have made all of the hoops that only applied to individuals. They've kind of extended that to trusts as well. But there's one benefit to everyone. That provision that Emily was talking about where you had to essentially get the chief law enforcement officer sign off, they did away with that and just changed it to a notice requirement. You have to notify them of your intention to acquire one of these items. So they've made it a little bit easier, but are making everyone jump through the same hoops. And it kind of begs that question of, are there benefits to still having a trust today? And I still say the answer is yes.
If you're going to have to send in your fingerprints and your photograph anyway, trust or individual, I think our most common question is,
yes,
should I still get a trust? So, Richard, should I still get a trust?
Yes, likely yes. And here's how to know whether you are a good candidate for a trust or whether you should get a trust. If you intend on purchasing or acquiring an NFA item and you have no intention of anyone else ever possessing it, then maybe you just own the item as an individual. However, if you live in a household with another person, or maybe you want other people to be allowed to possess the items, you go to a range day and you want your brother-in-law to be able to possess, your suppressor, for example. That might mean, hey, I may be a better candidate for an NFA trust because that's the primary benefit. As an individual, only one person is legally allowed to possess the item, as opposed to a trust where you could have multiple designated persons who could all possess the item legally.
Right. Your co-trustees. I mean, it's nice to have. I mean, if you shoot with your wife, if you want your children to be able to, take these items out on the range,
Yep.
You have these co-trustees. It's great. Now everybody's got to send in their fingerprints and photographs,
Yep.
but so much better than just like, well, it's my suppressor. I'm the only one who can be in possession of it, and that's the end of the story. We also have the benefit of beneficiaries.
Yeah,
right?
or moving outside of probate.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you create a trust. Not only do you have co-trustees, you have beneficiaries. So when you die, when all the co-trustees die, you know where these items are going to go. And, it's not moving through, your normal estate process. It's already built in.
When you die, it doesn't affect the item at that point. It goes to the other co-trustees, the other beneficiaries, and it doesn't really, your death doesn't have an impact on the ownership of the item, which some people find very beneficial. But we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please question and comment below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.